Josh Evans hunched his shoulders as he navigated the crowded hallways of Eastbrook High School. At 16, he was painfully aware of how his lanky 5'10" frame and awkward gait made him stand out among the confident teenagers who seemed to own these halls. His dark-rimmed glasses kept sliding down his nose, and his curly brown hair needed a trim weeks ago. The oversized thrift store clothes he wore partly due to his family's tight budget since moving to this affluent suburb, and partly to hide his lean frame only added to his new kid aura that seemed to attract the wrong kind of attention. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It had been 3 weeks since his family relocated after his mother's job transfer, and Josh was still trying to find his footing. Back in his old town, he'd had friends who appreciated his quiet intelligence and dry humor. Here, those qualities seemed to paint a target on his back. What no one at Eastbrook knew, what no one had bothered to find out, was that Josh had been training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since he was 6 years old. His father, a former MMA fighter, had insisted that his son learn to defend himself. For 10 years, Josh had dedicated himself to the discipline, eventually earning his brown belt and winning several youth regional championships. But his father had always emphasized that these skills were for protection, never for aggression. The true strength of a fighter, his dad often said, is knowing when not to fight. So far at Eastbrook, Josh had been following that philosophy religiously. The self-proclaimed rulers of Eastbrook's social hierarchy were Carson Reed and his two constant shadows, Nate Harris and Ryan Thompson. Carson was the star quarterback with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of confident swagger that came from never hearing the word no. Nate was his sharp-tongued lieutenant, always ready with a cruel joke or sarcastic comment. Ryan was the enforcer, a bulky linebacker whose neck seemed to have disappeared years ago beneath layers of muscle. They had noticed Josh on his very first day, when he'd accidentally bumped into Carson while looking at his schedule. "Watch it, freak," Carson had snarled, shoving Josh hard enough to send him stumbling into the lockers. Josh had mumbled an apology and quickly walked away, telling himself that engaging wasn't worth it. He was here to get good grades and eventually get into a decent college, not to make waves. The breaking point of that first morning came in the cafeteria. Josh stood with his tray, scanning the room for an empty table. The social minefield was obvious. Each cluster of students represented a different tier of the school's hierarchy. He spotted an empty table near the windows and made his way over, hoping to eat in peace. That's when he noticed her. Ellie Martinez sat alone at a corner table, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, completely absorbed in a thick biology textbook. Unlike the other students who seemed to perform their lunch conversations for an audience, she appeared genuinely content in her solitude. Josh hesitated for a moment, then approached her table. "Mind if I sit here?" Ellie looked up, her brown eyes curious but kind. "Sure, as long as you don't mind sharing space with my mitochondria diagrams." Josh managed a small smile as he sat down. "Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell." "Very good," Ellie said with a grin. "You might actually survive a P-biology." It was the first genuine conversation Josh had at Eastbrook, and for the first time since arriving, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he might find his place here. By the end of his first week, Carson and his friends had established a routine. They'd accidentally knocked Josh's books out of his hands in the hallway. They'd taken to calling him Scarecrow because of his thin build and awkward clothes, and the nickname had started to spread. In the cafeteria, they'd make exaggerated gagging sounds if he sat anywhere near them, ensuring he ate alone except for when Ellie joined him. Just get through the day, Josh thought as he slipped into his seat for English class. Don't engage. Don't give them what they want. But each day it got harder to follow his own advice. "Hey, Scarecrow," Carson whispered from the seat behind him. "Did your mom dress you this morning? Or did you pick those clothes from the dumpster yourself? Josh stared straight ahead, focusing on Mrs. Patterson as she discussed their upcoming essay on the outsiders. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I think he's deaf," Nate Stage whispered from the seat beside Carson. "Or maybe just stupid," Ryan added with a grunt. Josh's fingers tightened around his pencil, but he kept his expression neutral. What they didn't realize was that every insult, every push, every humiliation was being carefully cataloged in his mind. Not for revenge, at least. That's what he told himself, but as data points, teaching him their patterns, their weaknesses, their psychology. It was how he approached jiu-jitsu matches too. Study your opponent, understand their tendencies, find their vulnerabilities. But unlike in jiu-jitsu, he had no intention of using that knowledge. His father's words echoed in his head. "The moment you use your training to intimidate others, you've lost everything I've tried to teach you." So Josh endured. The pattern continued for 2 more weeks. In the hallways, Carson would shoulder check him hard enough to send his books flying. In gym class, he somehow always ended up as Josh's opponent in whatever activity they were doing, using it as an opportunity to accidentally hurt him. Josh deliberately underperformed, knowing that showing his true athletic ability would only make things worse. Some of the other students had started to notice. A few gave him sympathetic looks, but no one intervened. Josh understood Carson's father was on the school board, and his family donated heavily to the athletic department. Besides, in the hierarchy of high school problems, a few shoves and mean comments didn't register as a crisis requiring intervention. Josh had made exactly one friend, Ellie. Sometimes they would eat lunch together in the courtyard, away from the cacophony of the cafeteria. "You know, you could report them," Ellie suggested one day after witnessing Carson knock Josh's lunch tray from his hands in the cafeteria line. Josh had just shrugged as he picked up the scattered food. "And then what? They get detention, and then they make my life even more miserable? No thanks. So you're just going to let them keep doing this?" Ellie pressed. Josh gave her a small, mysterious smile. "I'm handling it my way." The truth was, he wasn't sure how much longer he could handle it. Each night he would take out his frustrations on the punch-in bag Coach Ramirez had recommended for his garage, practicing combinations until his knuckles were raw. Sometimes he imagined Carson's face on the bag, and those sessions lasted much longer. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October. Josh was already having a rough morning. He'd forgotten his umbrella and was soaked by the time he reached school. He was changing his shirt in the bathroom when the door swung open, and Carson, Nate, and Ryan sauntered in. "Well, look at Scarecrow trying to build some muscle," Carson sneered, eyeing Josh's exposed torso. What they couldn't know was that beneath the baggy clothes, Josh was lean but powerfully built from years of training. His shoulders were broader than they appeared, his core tight with muscle developed through countless hours of grappling. Josh quickly pulled his dry shirt on, but not before Ryan snapped a picture with his phone. "This is going on Instagram," Ryan laughed. Caption: "Local Scarecrow caught changing. Bird's still not scared." "Just delete it," Josh said quietly, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside him. "Or what?" Carson stepped closer, using his 2-inch height advantage to loom over Josh. "What are you going to do about it, Scarecrow?" Josh met his gaze steadily. "I'm asking nicely, delete it. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The 3 bullies exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by Josh's calm demeanor. Then Carson shoved him hard against the wall. "Listen, freak, you don't get to make demands here. You're nothing. A skinny little nobody who dresses like a homeless person. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." Josh felt something snap inside him. Not his control that remained intact, but his willingness to accept this treatment. For the first time since arriving at Eastbrook, he straightened. to his full height and looked Carson directly in the eye. "I've been nothing but respectful to you," Josh said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made the bathroom suddenly feel smaller. "I've ignored your comments, your shoving, your name-calling. But I'm done being your punching bag." Carson's face flushed red. "You think you're tough now, Scarecrow? You want to find out what happens when you talk back to me?" "I'm not looking for a fight," Josh replied calmly. "But I'm not going to be pushed around anymore either." The tension in the bathroom was electric. Ryan stepped forward, cracking his knuckles, while Nate shifted nervously behind Carson. For a moment, Josh could see the scenario playing out in his mind, how easily he could neutralize all three of them without breaking a sweat. His father's training had prepared him for situations exactly like this, but his father's voice was louder. "The moment you use your training to intimidate others... Josh took a step back, but his eyes never left Carson's. "Delete the picture. Carson, this doesn't have to escalate." Carson's laugh was ugly. "Oh, it's already escalated, Scarecrow. See you after school. Behind the gym. We'll settle this properly." As they filed out of the bathroom, Josh caught his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in weeks, he didn't see a victim staring back at him. He saw someone who had finally found his voice. Josh found Ellie in the library during lunch, hunched over her biology textbook. She looked up as he approached, immediately, noticing the tension in his posture. "What happened?" she asked, closing her book. Josh sat down heavily beside her and recounted the bathroom confrontation. Ellie listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "So, Carson challenged you to a fight?" she said when he finished. "Behind the gym after school," Josh confirmed. "You're not actually going to do it, are you?" Josh was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Part of me wants to walk away, pretend it never happened. But another part of me is tired of running." "Josh, there's a difference between standing up for yourself and getting into a fight that could get you suspended or worse." "I know." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting an internal struggle she'd never seen before. "Ellie, can I tell you something?" "Something I haven't told anyone at this school," she nodded. "I know martial arts. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been training since I was 6. Ellie's eyes widened. "Are you kidding me? This whole time while Carson's been pushing you around, you could have defended yourself." "It's not that simple," Josh said quickly. "My father taught me that these skills are for protection, not aggression. The moment I use them to intimidate or hurt someone, I lose everything he's tried to teach me about discipline and control." "But, Josh, what Carson's doing, that's not right either. You have a right to defend yourself." "Do I?" Josh asked. "Or am I supposed to just keep taking it? Because fighting back makes me as bad as they are?" Ellie reached out and touched his arm. "There's a difference between being a bully and protecting yourself. Carson's been terrorizing you for weeks. At some point, turning the other cheek becomes enabling." Josh stared at the table, his mind racing. Everything his father had taught him said to walk away, to let it go, to be the bigger person. But everything inside him was screaming that enough was enough. "What would you do?" he asked Ellie. "Honestly? I'd probably report it to the administration. But I also know that might not stop Carson, and it might make things worse for you." She paused, studying his face. "But if you're asking what I think you should do about the fight, I think you should defend yourself if you have to. Just don't become them." Josh nodded slowly. For the first time since arriving at Eastbrook, he felt like he had a real choice. Not between fighting and not fighting, but between being a victim and being someone who stood up for himself. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Josh went through his classes mechanically, barely hearing the teachers, his mind focused on what was coming. By the time the final bell rang, word had spread throughout the school. Carson had made sure everyone knew about the challenge, turning it into a spectacle. As Josh walked toward the gym, he felt strangely calm. Whatever happened next? He was done being afraid. A crowd had already gathered behind the gym when Josh arrived. It seemed like half the school was there, forming a loose circle in the grass. Carson stood in the center with Ryan and Nate flanking him, playing to the audience. Wasn't sure Scarecrow would show, Carson called out as Josh approached. Thought, you might chicken out and run home to mommy. Josh stepped into the circle, his face expressionless. The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in his demeanor. This wasn't the same awkward kid they'd watched get pushed around for weeks. I'm here, Josh said simply. Carson grinned, but there was something uncertain in his eyes. Josh's calm confidence was clearly not what he'd expected. Last chance to back down, freak. Save yourself the embarrassment. Josh looked around the circle of faces, some eager for violence, others uncomfortable with what was about to happen. He spotted Ellie near the back, her face tight with worry. Their eyes met for a moment, and she gave him the slightest nod. I'm not backing down, Josh said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. But I want everyone to understand something first. I didn't ask for this fight. I've tried to avoid it. But Carson has decided that I need to be taught a lesson. He turned to face his tormentor directly. So let's get this over with. Carson's uncertainty vanished, replaced by anger at being upstaged. You're going to regret running your mouth. Scarecrow. He lunged forward, throwing a wild haymaker that would have connected with devastating force if Josh had been where Carson expected him to be. Instead, Josh stepped slightly to the side, his years of training taking over. Carson's momentum carried him past Josh, who could have easily taken him down right then, but he didn't. Carson, stop, Josh said calmly. This is stupid. We don't have to do this. Carson spun around, his face red with embarrassment and rage. Fight me, you coward. He charged again, this time leading with his shoulder like he was making a tackle. Josh sidestepped again, but this time Carson was ready for it. He adjusted his trajectory and caught Josh around the waist, driving him backward. The crowd roared as both boys hit the ground, Carson on top. For a moment, it looked like the quarterback's size and strength would win the day. But then something shifted. Josh's hips moved in a way that didn't seem possible, and suddenly Carson found himself flipped over, with Josh controlling his position from the top. Stay down, Josh said quietly, just loud enough for Carson to hear. Please, but Carson's pride wouldn't let him quit. He struggled wildly, trying to use his strength to overpower Josh. What he didn't understand was that Josh was letting him struggle, using Carson's own energy against him while remaining perfectly balanced and in control. To the crowd, it looked like an even fight. To Josh, it felt like child's play. Carson managed to get back to his feet, but Josh could see the uncertainty in his eyes now. The easy victory Carson had expected wasn't materializing, and the crowd's energy was shifting. Some of the students were starting to cheer for Josh, the underdog who was holding his own against the school's golden boy. You're lucky I'm going. Easy on you, Scarecrow, Carson panted, trying to save face. Josh didn't respond. He was focused on reading Carson's body language, predicting his next move. His father had taught him that most untrained fighters telegraph their intentions through their posture, their breathing, their eye movements. Carson might as well have been holding up signs. Carson came at him again, this time trying to grab Josh's shirt to hold him in place while he threw punches. Josh let him get a grip, then used a simple arm drag to redirect Carson's energy, sending the quarterback stumbling past him again. The crowd was getting restless. They'd come to see a beatdown, but what they were watching was more like a dance, with Josh always one step ahead of Carson's attacks. Fight him properly, Ryan shouted from the sidelines. Yeah, quit running around like a scared rabbit, Nate added, though his voice lacked conviction. Josh finally stopped moving and faced Carson directly. You want me to fight? Fine, but remember you asked for this. Carson's eyes lit up, thinking. He was finally going to get the brawl he wanted. He threw a straight punch aimed at Josh's face, putting all his weight behind it. Josh caught his wrist in midair. The crowd went silent. Carson's eyes widened in shock as he realized his punch had been stopped as easily as if he'd been hitting a wall. Josh's grip was firm, but not crushing, a demonstration of control rather than cruelty. "This is your last chance to walk away," Josh said quietly. "I don't want to hurt you." Carson tried to pull his arm free, but Josh's grip didn't budge. Panic started to creep into the quarterback's eyes as he realized he was completely outmatched. "Let go of me," Carson demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Josh released his wrist and stepped back. "Then stop attacking me." But Carson's pride and the expectations of the crowd wouldn't let him quit. With a roar of frustration, he charged one more time, both arms extended, trying to tackle Josh to the ground. This time, Josh didn't hold back. Josh stepped into Carson's charge, his right arm sliding under Carson's left while his left hand controlled Carson's right wrist. In one fluid motion that looked almost effortless, he used Carson's own momentum to throw him over his hip in a perfect judo throw. Carson hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could recover, Josh had smoothly transitioned to a mounted position, controlling Carson's arms and making it impossible for him to get up. The crowd was dead silent. "It's over," Josh said calmly, looking down at Carson. "Are we done?" Carson struggled beneath him, but it was like trying to escape from quicksand. Every movement he made only put him in a worse position, while Josh remained perfectly balanced and in control. "Get off me," Carson gasped. "Say it's over," Josh replied. "Admit that you were wrong to bully me, and this ends right now." Carson's face was red with exertion and humiliation. He could feel the eyes of the entire school on him, watching their golden boy get dominated by the kid they'd all been calling Scarecrow. "I'm not saying anything to you, freak." Josh sighed and shifted his position slightly, applying just enough pressure to make Carson extremely uncomfortable without actually hurting him. "Carson, I could have ended this fight 30 seconds after it started. I could have choked you unconscious or dislocated your shoulder. I didn't do any of that because I don't want to hurt you. I just want this to stop." Carson's struggles grew weaker as the reality of his situation sank in. Josh wasn't even breathing hard, while Carson was exhausted from fighting against techniques. He didn't understand. "Fine," Carson whispered finally. "It's over," louder, Josh said, so everyone can hear. "It's over," Carson shouted, his voice breaking with frustration and humiliation. Josh immediately released him and stood up, offering his hand to help Carson to his feet. Carson slapped it away and scrambled up on his own, his face burning with shame. Crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Josh had done the impossible. He'd beaten Carson Reed, and he'd done it without throwing a single punch. As the other students drifted away, Josh found himself standing alone with Ellie, who had waited for the crowd to thin before approaching. You okay?" she asked. Josh nodded, though he was still processing what had just happened. "I think so. I never wanted it to come to that." "You did the right thing," Ellie said firmly. "You defended yourself, but you didn't hurt him more than necessary. Your father would be proud." Josh looked back toward the gym, where Carson was walking away with Ryan and Nate. The quarterback's shoulders were slumped in defeat, and for the first time since Josh had known him, Carson looked small. "I hope so," Josh said quietly. "I really hope so." The next morning, Josh walked into school to find everything had changed. Students who had never acknowledged his existence before now nodded at him in the hallways. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with wariness, the same kind of careful distance they'd always shown Carson. But perhaps the most significant change was in Carson himself. Josh found him sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at his lunch without his usual entourage. Ryan and Nate were at their old table, but they kept glancing over at Carson with uncertain expressions, as if they weren't sure whether they were still welcome in his orbit. Josh hesitated for a moment, then walked over to Carson's table. Mind. If I sit? He asked. Carson looked up, his eyes still holding traces of yesterday's humiliation. Free country. Josh sat down across from him. Look, about yesterday. You don't need to gloat, Carson interrupted, his voice bitter. You won. Everyone saw it. Congratulations. I'm not here to gloat, Josh said calmly. I'm here because I want this to be over, really over, not just the fighting but all of it. The name-calling, the pushing, the whole thing. Carson stared at his sandwich. What do you want from me? A public apology? A promise to be your best friend? I want you to leave me alone, Josh said simply. And I want to leave you alone. That's it. Carson was quiet for a long moment. When he finally looked up, his expression was different, less angry, more confused. How did you do that yesterday? You made it look so easy. 10 years of training, Josh replied. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. 10 years? Carson's eyebrows rose. And you never said anything? Never used it before? My father taught me that fighting should always be the last resort. I tried everything else first. Carson nodded slowly, as if he was finally understanding something that had been beyond his grasp. I've been a real jerk to you, haven't I? Josh didn't answer immediately. Yeah, he said finally. You have. Why didn't you just tell me you knew martial arts? I would have backed off. Would you have? Or would you have just made it about proving you were tougher than the martial arts kid? Carson considered this, and his expression grew troubled. Probably the second one, he admitted. I am not used to people not being afraid of me. I was afraid of you, Josh said quietly. Not of what you could do to me physically, but of what I might do to you if I lost control. That's what scared me. Carson stared at him for a moment, then laughed, not his usual mocking laugh, but something genuine and surprised. You were protecting me from yourself? In a way, yeah. Carson shook his head. I don't understand you at all. You don't have to, Josh said, standing up. You just have to leave me alone. As Josh walked away, he heard Carson call after him. Evans? Josh turned back. I'm sorry, Carson said, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. I'm really sorry. Josh nodded once, then continued walking. Behind him, the cafeteria buzzed with whispered conversations about the apology no one had expected to hear. 2 weeks later, Josh was surprised to find Nate Harris waiting by his locker after school. Hey, Nate said awkwardly. Can I talk to you for a minute? Josh closed his locker and faced him. What's up? I wanted to apologize, Nate said, the words coming out in a rush. For all the stuff we did to you. The name-calling, the pushing. Around all of it. It wasn't cool. Josh studied Nate's face, looking for signs of insincerity. He found none. Okay, apology accepted. Really? Just like that? Just like that, Josh confirmed. We're good. Nate looked relieved, but also curious. Can I ask you something? That fight with Carson, where did you learn to do that? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been training since I was 6. Would you? Nate hesitated, then pushed forward. Would you maybe teach me some stuff? I don't want to be the guy who just follows bullies around anymore. I want to be able to stand up for myself, and for other people, if I need to. Josh was quiet for a moment, considering. His father had always said that martial arts were meant to be shared, but only with people who would use them responsibly. It's not just about learning techniques, Josh said finally. It's about discipline, respect, self-control. If I teach you anything, you have to promise me you'll never use it to hurt someone who doesn't deserve it. I promise, Nate said immediately. I'm tired of being the guy who laughs while other people get hurt. Josh nodded. There's a gym about 10 minutes from here. Ramirez Academy. Tell Coach Ramirez that Josh Evans sent you, and that you want to learn the right way. He'll take care of you. Nate's face lit up. Really? You do that for me? Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were, Josh said. This is yours." As Nate walked away, Josh felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Ellie behind him, smiling. "That was nice of you," she said. "He seems genuine," Josh replied. "People can change." "Speaking of change," Ellie said, "have you noticed how different things are around here? It's like the whole social dynamic shifted overnight," Josh had noticed. Without Carson's group setting the tone for bullying behavior, other students had become kinder, more inclusive. The atmosphere in the hallways was noticeably friendlier. "Sometimes it just takes one person willing to stand up," Josh said. "Maybe that person doesn't have to be the strongest or the most popular. Maybe they just have to be willing to do what's right." Ellie linked her arm through his as they walked toward the parking lot. "I'm proud of you, you know. Not just for winning that fight, but for how you've handled everything since. You could have used what happened to become the new bully, but you didn't." Josh thought about his father's lessons, about discipline and control and using strength wisely. "My dad always said that true power isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself." "Smart man, your father." "Yeah," Josh said, pulling out his phone to text his dad about his day. "Yeah, he is." 3 months later, Josh was in the gym after school, helping Coach Ramirez demonstrate techniques to a group of new students that included Nate. The younger boy had thrown himself into training with surprising dedication, and was already showing real progress. Josh was in the middle of explaining a basic armbar when Carson Reed walked into the gym. The room went quiet. Carson's presence was unexpected. He'd never shown any interest in martial arts before, and his relationship with Josh, while no longer hostile, was still cautious and distant. "Can I help you?" Coach Ramirez asked. Carson looked around the gym, taking in the mats, the equipment, the students in their training clothes. His eyes found Josh, and he walked over. "I was wondering if I could sign up for classes," Carson said quietly. Josh raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? I've been thinking about what you said. About discipline and control and using strength the right way." Carson's voice was different from the arrogant tone Josh remembered, humbler, more uncertain. "I realized I don't know anything about any of that. I've just been throwing my weight around because I could." Coach Ramirez studied Carson with the sharp eyes of someone who had been teaching for decades. "Why do you want to learn?" Carson was quiet for a moment. "Because I want to be better than I was. I want to understand what Josh has that I don't." Josh felt a strange mix of emotions, surprise, respect, and something that might have been pride. The Carson Reed standing in front of him was not the same person who had terrorized him months ago. "It's not easy," Josh warned. "This isn't about learning to fight. It's about learning to control yourself first." "I know," Carson said. "I'm willing to start at the bottom. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Coach Ramirez looked at Josh. "What do you think?" Josh considered carefully. 3 months ago, he would never have imagined this moment. Carson Reed, the school's golden boy, the untouchable quarterback, asking for help, asking to learn humility. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better," Josh said finally, echoing the words he'd spoken to Nate. "If you're serious about this, then welcome to the team." Carson nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As the class resumed, Josh found himself working with Carson on basic positions. The former bully was clumsy and frustrated, used to physical activities coming easily to him. But he didn't quit, and he didn't complain. During a water break, Carson approached Josh privately. "I never thanked you," Carson said. "For what?" "For not humiliating me more than you had to. That day behind the gym, you could have really hurt me. You could have made me look even worse in front of everyone. But you didn't." Josh shrugged. "That wouldn't have solved anything." "Maybe not, but it would have been satisfying, wouldn't it? Getting revenge on the guy who made your life miserable?" Josh thought about it honestly. For about 5 seconds, yeah. "But then I would have become the kind of person my father taught me never to be." Carson nodded slowly. Your father sounds like a good man. He is. He taught me that the strongest people are the ones who can control their strength. The ones who choose mercy when they could choose violence. Think you could teach me that? Josh looked at Carson, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine humility and a desire to learn. This wasn't the same person who had called him Scarecrow and shoved him into lockers. I think, Josh said carefully, that you're already learning it. As they returned to training, Josh reflected on how much had changed since that first day at Eastbrook. He'd come to the school trying to be invisible, hoping to avoid conflict at all costs. Instead, he'd been forced to confront his fears, stand up for himself, and ultimately help others do the same. The shy, awkward new kid was gone. In his place was someone who understood that true strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with wisdom, courage, and compassion. His father had been right all along. The greatest victory wasn't defeating your enemies, it was turning them into allies. And sometimes, Josh thought as he watched Carson struggle with a basic technique, the greatest test of a warrior wasn't knowing when to fight, it was knowing when to teach. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.